Welcome back. In the previous video, I started the process of creating the draw bars block. I showed the math for calculating how tall to draw each block, so if you missed it, go back and check it out because it's really important to understand. In order to draw more than one bar, let's open up the draw bars block, because I'm going to be drawing a bar for every single data record inside of the CO2 emissions data. I want to make sure that I can access each item, so my favorite block for accessing items in a list is the for each block found in the variables palette. And for each item of the data list that I pass in, I want to first say every single item, just so I know that this is working correctly. So I'm going to hit apply, and before I hit OK or before I hit the block, what I got to make sure is that I'm actually showing the sprite. Because if I don't show the sprite, then you're not going to see anything when I do click draw bars. So right now when I click draw bars, it's going through every single data record. And you can see that it's showing me the label, which is the country name, and it's showing me the value, which is their CO2 emissions data. I'll go ahead and hide the sprite now, and inside of draw bars, instead of saying the item, I want to draw a bar for each item. So I know that it works, I know that I'm able to access my data, and now instead of saying Germany for every single bar or for every single item inside of the list, I want to actually say the country name, which is found in the label of the data record. So I'm going to use my selector label from data record, and the data record will be the item. So I'm going to use that as the label for my draw bar block. We can keep the label size at 20, and for the width, we can use the width that is passed in to draw bars. For height, this is where the math from my previous video comes in handy. In order to determine the height that the bar should be, we have to extract the value from data record. So I have to use my selector, value from data record, and I have to select that value from the item that I'm looking at. Next, I want to divide the value by the maximum value in the entire data set. So I want to move this over a little bit so we can read this. So where did I actually get the max value? Oh, that's right. In the previous video, we created a block called max of list that allowed us to get the maximum value of a data set. The issue here is that I never saved this value anywhere. So I think I should create a global variable that will allow me to save max of list that other blocks can then use. So I'm going to go to variables and I'm going to name this block the greatest value. Greatest value in dataset. Let's be a little bit more specific. So this variable is global and I'm going to initialize it right at the beginning of draw bars. So I'm going to set this value, or this variable I should say, the greatest value in dataset to this max of list. Now there is a mistake here. Let me just move this stuff down a little bit. There is a mistake. I don't want to set it to the maximum value of the CO2 emissions data every single time I run this, because sometimes I might put in a data set that isn't the CO2 emissions data. So I want to use whatever data list is passed in, and that's where I want to find the greatest value. Now I can divide the value from the data record by this greatest value in data set, and I'm not done yet. Now suppose, for example, that my value from data record for the item is 4,000 and the greatest value in the entire data set is 8,000. So 4,000 divided by 8,000 is 0.5, so half. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that the bar that I draw for that data record is half of the largest possible bar, or the largest bar that will be drawn because of the largest value in the data set. So to do that, I want to take this answer and I want to multiply it by the max bar height. So in this case, it's going to be 240, but since that can change, I'm just going to use the parameter right there. And that's going to equal my height. So I'm going to bring this over to height, and I'm going to hit apply, and now I'm going to draw a bar correctly of the correct size based on my maximum bar height for the greatest value in the data set. And now I can test out my block. So let's go to the center of the stage, and when I hit draw bars, you'll notice that you only see China on the stage. Why is that? Let me open it up again and let me think. Well, if you think about it, after it draws a bar, it's just going to continue drawing bars one on top of the other. So what I need to do is I have to change the X value and the Y value to kind of reset the sprite before it starts drawing the next bar. If I think even further, I want every single bar to start at the Y coordinate of the origin. So why don't we make sure that after we write the label text at some value, we make sure that we go right to the Y coordinate of the origin, and then we start drawing the bar. So it always starts from the line. So where do I draw the bar? So if we look closely, we actually have to look at another block. We have to look at the draw axes block, and this is where we determine the Y coordinate. Now in the draw axes block, we set the, okay, we have a problem here. Actually, this is a bug. We set the Y coordinate to Y0, which is fine, but we never set the X coordinate to the correct value, which was X0. And that has to be changed to X origin, because right now it's not really changing anything. Another issue I'm seeing is that I used the parameters directly in the blocks, and I probably should have used my variables that I had just initialized. So let me make that change and fix it from before. Great. It's actually going to work the same as it did before, but now this is correct. And now we can use the Y origin inside of the other block. Once I hit apply, once draw axes is enabled or run, then I can use the Y origin block right here, this reporter, inside of this draw bar block. And I want to make sure that when I draw a bar, right after the label, I go to the Y origin before I draw the actual bar. So I actually have to go deeper into the draw bar block. And I'm going to use Y origin in here. So after we label the text, which is the country, in this case, we're actually moving 10 steps, but I want to change that. I want it to always go to the Y axis. I want to change the Y or set the Y to the Y origin. So that way, when I draw the bar, instead of moving 10 steps, so the countries might have different lengths, I want to just make sure that it always goes to the Y origin before it draws the bar. And the bar is just a line. So I'm going to hit apply, I'm going to hit OK, and I think that would help a little bit, but the issue is that I'm not starting every single label at the same location. So why don't we start writing our label maybe at negative, 150 or so, and let's test it out. So we want to set the Y to negative 150, and then in draw bar, it's going to write the label. And within there, within draw bar, let me just show you one more time, it's going to set Y to the Y origin. So we don't have to worry about it not being in the right spot. I think this should work. There's going to be one more issue. In between every single bar, we're not moving over to the right. So what I want to do is I want to change the X by a certain value. And why don't we use the width of every single bar to move over before we start drawing the next bar. I realize this is a lot. This is actually really different than what we had before, but let me clear it out and let me see if this runs correctly. Let me hit apply and let me draw the bars and see what happens. Actually, before I draw bars, I have to draw the axes because otherwise the Y coordinate won't get set. So let me actually disable this greatest value in dataset. We don't need to see it. But I have to make sure that I draw the axes first, because that is when the Y coordinate gets initialized, and the draw bars block uses that Y coordinate. So I'm going to draw my axes, and whoa, they're really thick. That's probably because the last time I drew something, it was a large, thick line. So let me edit the draw axes block, and let me make sure that I set the pen size to 1. So that way when we draw the axes, we're not drawing some monstrous lines. There we go. Let me draw axes. Actually, hold on. I have to clear the stage first. Let me draw the axes, and there we go. We have a thin line. And now I'm going to draw bars, and we're going to have a moment of truth here. Oh, look at that. It started drawing the bars, but to the right of the axes. So what we have to do is actually reset the X initially. So we have to reset the X coordinate in the beginning of this. So let's make sure that once the axes have been drawn, we actually go to, so let me set the X coordinate to the X origin. So that way it kind of like goes right back to the left. And once we start this, this should work, I think. So let me just clear the stage, let me draw the axes, let me draw the bars, and look at that. It actually looks okay. I think I can do a little bit better by moving the labels down a little bit. So I'm going to edit this, and I'm going to start the labels not at -150, but let's say -180. And I'm going to give them a little bit more space. So we're not going to change X by the width. We're going to change X by, let's say, the width plus 10 or so. So let me use an operator to do that. And that way it gives it a little bit more space in between every single bar. So I'm going to hit apply. Actually, I didn't even put it in the right spot. Let me place it in the right spot, and then I'm going to hit apply. I'm going to hit OK, and let's try this again. Let's clear the stage. Let's draw the axes. Let's draw the bars, and that looks pretty good. Now, another thing I'm noticing is that the first bar for China is right in the middle of the y-axis. So let me move that over just a little bit. Let me go over to Edit. And instead of setting X to the X origin, we'll set it to the X origin, and let's put in like a bar's worth of space in between. So we're going to add the X origin to the width of a bar. And I think if we set the X to that, that should work. So let me hit apply, let me hit OK, clear the stage, draw the axes, and draw my bars. And that looks awesome. You could play around with the size of the text in the label, but I'm just going to leave it like this because I think this is pretty good. Next up, I want to actually label the vertical axis. And I was going to do that in this video, but I guess we're going to have to do part 4 because this video is already getting a little too long.